All right, you see, the other day I had this sort of idea, right? And I know that's corny, but let me tell you about it because it's really important. You see this amp back here. Actually, this amp right here. I got this amp about a week ago. And when it comes to genre, this is really not usually the type of amp that I would use. But I was trying to make a point on how some high gain amps can get some really, really cool clean tones. In a much broader sense, I think I was talking about how beneficial it can be to drop some of your assumptions about gear like I have in the past, and how honestly thinking outside the box sometimes can be the catalyst for some of the coolest guitar tones you'll ever get in your life. Catalyst is a fantastic word, by the way. Put that in your word of the day. But honestly, all of that got me thinking, and it actually gave me another brilliant idea. You see, what if sometimes in order to go outside of the box, you actually need to go inside the box? Okay, so this isn't actually the box that I'm talking about. When I say box, I'm actually talking about interfaces. What if we bypass the amp completely and just recorded guitars DI? No amp, no cab, no nothing. I literally might need to call the presses because no one has ever done this before. No one has literally ever thought at this high a level. Like, we could make trillions. Okay, so I just looked this up, and apparently there are a couple of semi-relevant guitar players who have tried this before. Once or twice. You see, the reason I've been doing this is because lately I've been really trying to shape my sound as a guitar player. Not just my chops, but actually trying to sound as unique as possible. I know for a fact that I'm not going to out-shred anybody, so I'm trying to find my thing. I think it's because I've been doing so much with amps recently that this is something that I genuinely overlook. And I don't know why it gets so overlooked, because most of the legendary guitar tones, like of all time, actually came from players who I always assume were in the studio saying stuff like, "Hey, Harold, can you tell the intern I'm gonna need him to go pick up a plexi, a 4x12, and some of those chips from Jimmy John's." When in reality, a lot of those players actually opted for something different. And these weren't just regular guys. I mean, these guitar players were high rollers. Jimmy Page, Nile Rodgers, Prince, David Gilmour, and I'm just gonna come out and say it. I know this is like a cardinal sin of guitar playing, but I've literally never listened to a full Pink Floyd song. Listen, I just want to be vulnerable. But that's why we're here, so we can collectively learn and experience this stuff together for the first time. But real talk, the way that these guys actually did some of their legendary recordings, DI, actually really interesting. The first time I ever saw it done really properly was actually with a guy by the name of Corey Wong when I was really trying to study funk. You see, what a lot of these guys would do is actually they would plug straight into the console. Now, unfortunately, I can't afford a console because money's a little tight because I spent all my money on light bulbs. But that's where the ideas come from. But I do think I found a good replacement. You see, this right here is a Neve 88M. It's an audio interface, and it actually happens to have the same preamps as a pretty legendary console. That console is actually called the Neve 88R, and upon doing a little bit of research, it's used currently at a little studio. You might have heard of it. It's called, what's it called? Oh, Abbey Road. Now, the 88R has 100 channels. Who even knows how many inputs? But luckily for what I'm showing you today, we only need 2. And these, like I said, are Neve preamp. So that's it. We're ready to go, right? That's everything. But I'm going to stop you right there real quick because we need just one more thing. Just one more little thing. Upon doing some of my research, I found that Gilmour and a lot of these guys wouldn't just use the console, but would also use compressors, specifically in 1176. So I found that the Universal Audio UA Max preamp, which is a compressor pedal. Like I said, I spent most of my money today on light bulbs, so I don't know if I can really afford a real 1176, but this pedal does emulate an 1176, and it can do the exact Gilmour thing by stacking 2 1176s in series. So we have the console, we have the guitar, we have the compressor. I think we're finally ready to get going. We have the right attitude, so I think it's time I show you what I was talking about. Before you even plug in, here's a general piece of information that will literally save your tone. The difference between an amateur and a professional when it comes to getting good guitar recordings, just like with the different EQs and the tone knobs on your amp, paying attention to little things like gain staging will literally separate a person. And sometimes when I've hung out in studios with engineers who are way more knowledgeable than me, they spend hours on the littlest detail because they know it's worth it. And I think this should work, so let's try it. Now, obviously, if I told you beforehand that I had a single coil style guitar going into an 1176 style compressor, going into a Neve preamp, what's the first genre you're thinking of? I'm guessing it's funk. It's really really interesting though, because some of the best clean tones I feel like I've ever gotten in my entire life actually come straight from guitar going into 1176, then into a very big plate reverb. And then you finish it off with the Neve, it's like, in my opinion, when it comes to the compressor. I may not have listened to a whole Pink Floyd song, but I do know a little bit about Gilmour and how he used it. He used both 1176s in series at the same time, and you get this really, you can already hear the buzz. It's so weird, but it's so cool, especially when you crank a little distortion. So that's definitely not the tone I would use all the time or in every live setting, but I do think it has just as much or more character than the other two by a good margin. It's something that I feel like if you were to use in a live setting, you wouldn't use for every solo because that would get gimmicky, but you use it once or twice and you start to get that like Dan Auerbach with the arcs or Jack White tone, and it just becomes special. So I know what you're thinking. Mike, what's the point of all this? And first of all, thank you so much for asking. No one ever asks anymore, but the point is that finding your sound takes work, you know? It's more than just about your chops, which, don't get me wrong, are insanely important. I think what you play and how you play it is more important than the tone. But when it comes to the tone, it really is about getting some of those outside of the box ideas and pushing them just a bit farther. Now, is going direct out of your interface the only way to do that? I wouldn't necessarily say so, but it's crazy to think how doing something small like that can create such iconic tones for some of these players like Corey Wong and Prince. I also think techniques like this can really help you create a vibe. And yes, I know it's my least favorite Gen Z word, but hear me out for a second. When it comes to vibe, so often I forget that the tone you get is really about giving an atmosphere to your specific song. It's the type of atmosphere that I feel can separate a player and can take someone from, oh, that's a really good tone, to, oh, that's my tone. And even when you look at it from like an engineer's perspective, you understand why someone would want something like a Neve preamp, because it gives a specific color to the sound. And subconsciously, you know that your ear doesn't take that for granted. And I really do think if we're gonna be living in this era where every guitar player kind of has to be this jack of all trades, it can help tremendously to learn how to think like an engineer and to just understand their language, because sometimes they're just as weird as we are. But overall, all I want to say is thank you so much for watching this episode of Mike Learns About Gear. I think that's what I'm going to call this. I don't know. Tell me in the comments if you have a name. But thank you so much for watching. It was actually really crazy to be able to check out the Neve 88M, just see what it can do and see what actual Neve preamps sound like. If you want to know anything more about the 88M or even the UA Max, I got them both from the homies at Sweetwater. The links are in the description. It's one of the best ways to support the channel if that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about any of the other gear I used, make sure to check out those links. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most importantly, most important of all, have a fantastic day and see you on the flippity flip. I know it sounded better in my head. Oh my goodness, these guys are so good.